Welcome to the Sandy and Shawn Show on Mile High Sports. That's Sandy Clough. I'm Shawn Drotar. Thanks for joining us on a Monday. Obviously, a lot to get to today. We have a Stanley Cup Final set up. One of the teams that we've told you pretty much all year long that may very well have been there is there. The other one, maybe not so much. We'll break that down a little bit. We have a terrific story coming up with you with Dan Mohrmann joining us about the baseball championships over the course of the weekend, a storybook ending for one of Colorado's most famous and significant coaches in Cherry Creek High School. But we'll start with the Denver Broncos, Sandy, because over the weekend and over the last week or two, we've talked about this Courtland Sutton situation. The Broncos are in OTAs again this week. Mandatory minicamp is next week. Now that's when things get interesting because mandatory, right? So Courtland Sutton isn't there. Then the Broncos start having some alternatives if they'd like. But the longer that this holdout goes, the more leverage that Courtland Sutton seems to have. Over the weekend, Justin Jefferson signed a monster deal, 4 years, $140 million. Now, don't get me wrong, Courtland Sutton is not in the market for that. But the average salary for wide receivers goes up. And again, I understand Sutton did not have an extraordinary year, 44th in receiving in yards, but tied for 6th in touchdowns with an offense considered so dysfunctional that the Denver Broncos head coach jettisoned their quarterback for the most dead money in history in the NFL. Courtland Sutton can stand on those numbers, and I think those have a lot of value for him as 2 years are remaining on his contract, about $35 million in total, but only $2 million of it guaranteed.
So versus $110 million guaranteed for Justin Jefferson.
Right. So that average goes up for wide receivers. Oh, and by the way, now that Jefferson signed, CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys expected to be up next if Brandon Ayuk of the San Francisco 49ers doesn't get the next one. Either way, big money continuing to go to the wide receiver position. And, Tyreek Hill is up for an extension as well. So Courtland Sutton, the longer he waits, I get the Broncos argument. This is what we've talked about before. Both sides have leverage, but I think for one of the few times, Sutton actually has more. And the longer he waits, the better off he is. What happens? He holds out. The Broncos find him. They decide they want to cut him. Okay, he's going to be able to get more than $2 million guaranteed from somebody anywhere.
You would think so. From a team like Pittsburgh, for example, where the quarterback who threw all those touchdown passes to Courtland Sutton last year now resides as presumably the starting quarterback.
At least according to Mike Tomlin.
The Steelers have said during the offseason that, hey, at least for this year, Justin Fields will be backing up Russell Wilson. Again, all the disclaimers about injury are in effect here.
Well, always.
But it figures to be Wilson at least at the start of the year. It figures to be Wilson when the Pittsburgh Steelers and Broncos meet in week 2 in Denver, if I'm not mistaken. And yes, any wide receiver contract that is signed during this next month, 2 months, sometime before the start of training camp helps Courtland Sutton, who is not exactly a man without a team, but he does have more value than $2 million guaranteed dollars might suggest he does, the $2 million guaranteed dollars that are left on his deal. And you look at the teams around the league with cap room, the Lions,
who signed Amon-Ra St. Brown, by the way, to a deal that had $77 million in guaranteed money.
The Lions lost Josh Reynolds,
to the Broncos,
who was their number 3 receiver.
Right.
Couldn't they replace him with Courtland Sutton
is
at roughly the same cost?
Certainly. And at the number 3,
yeah.
I would argue Sutton is an upgrade over Reynolds at number 3. It's close to getting to the Super Bowl last year. So, yeah, I mean, that's
Can you believe
sense.
The Lions have almost $40.5 million, according to Over the Cap? They are the 3rd ranked team in the league when it comes to cap space.
How about that?
Behind only New England at 46.4 and Washington at 43.4.
You draft
Those
right.
are the 3 teams that are over $40 million in cap space. And Detroit, of course, was inches away from going to the Super Bowl last year out of the NFC North.
Now, that's in part that because some of these deals obviously end up kicking in a little bit later because some of them are extensions, obviously. But yeah, the Lions are in a good spot. And you're right. There are quite a few teams that have cap space. And we're talking about a lot of cap space. Now, the Broncos have about $7 million in this time, and that puts them in the bottom 10. But you're talking about teams that still have 20 million plus. It's half the league. The Bengals lost wide receivers. You think they couldn't use Courtland Sutton? Even if it's comparatively a possession guy? Yeah. I mean, you look at...
You have Higgins, who's asked to be traded.
Right.
He's their number 2. And Jamar Chase has not been involved in any offseason training activities either.
The Chargers have 26 million. The Eagles have 26 million, and they paid A.J. Brown. The Vikings, who give Jefferson the deal, still have 27 million. The Packers, with Jordan Love, 30 million. Lions with 40, as you pointed out. These are all contenders. These are all playoff caliber teams. They have the space, and they would presumably want Courtland Sutton. Sutton has no reason whatsoever not to hold out and force the Broncos' hand to either trade him or cut him. And I think that the Broncos, when push comes to shove, will probably do that simply because he's not a Sean Payton guy. I think the Broncos understand they're rebuilding. I think Sean Payton understands they're rebuilding. They're in a cap situation that's difficult. It just makes sense to move on and trade Courtland Sutton somewhere else. But for the Broncos, with all of these years of losing in a row, Sandy, one of the things that they have to do, and it's not just the Broncos. I'm not saying this. This is what teams do in any sport. They need Courtland Sutton to hold out a little bit more. So when they trade him for something that's not going to be very much, right? You won't get very much for Courtland Sutton. He's kind of got to look like the bad guy. You don't want the team to look like the bad guy. You got to be able to paint Courtland Sutton on the way out as well. He didn't want to be part of what we were doing. And so that's why we're moving on. So he's got to hold out a mini camp to do that. After the Broncos can kind of maybe paint him as the villain, then they can trade him. And whatever they get, they're able to go back to the fan base and say, well, he forced our hand, so we couldn't get very much in return.
I don't know that unless you're talking about a hardcore fan. The Broncos have no one left on their roster right now who has played in a playoff game wearing a Denver Bronco uniform. No one.
How about that?
So we talked about the Rockies.
That much of a turnover.
Delusional attitude about fan favorites the other day.
They've got guys that played in Rockies uniforms in the postseason.
But when Bronco fans look at the Broncos, they see no players who have made the playoffs.
That's just
in Bronco
fact.
Uniforms. So I don't think, especially with Sean Payton involved, there is any kind of public relations maneuvering that they need to do. I mean, Courtland Sutton is a nice player. He's a number 2 or number 3 receiver on most any good team in the league. He is not a number 1 for anybody, even some of the worst teams in the league. I suppose in New England, he could be number 1.
Right.
I suppose. I mean, don't the Broncos have at least one New England washout in their camp as a wide receiver? I mean, New England's been bad at the wide receiver position for a very long time, since Julian Edelman left. I mean,
Philip Dorsett was briefly
terrible
with the Patriots. So yeah,
I don't think they have to worry about that. And I also don't think they have to worry about the idea that they're getting rid of somebody who caught 10 touchdown passes last year, because the guy who threw him the 10 touchdown passes is reviled around here.
He got villainized on the way out.
Well, yes, he did.
By
but the
Payton?
fans had already come to the conclusion, because Sean Payton had very early in the season established that anything that went wrong, especially on offense, if not generally in terms of game outcomes, I'm talking about Miami. I mean, nobody in his right mind would say they lost in Miami the way they did, and Russell Wilson had anything to do with it, right? But in most instances, and this was true, almost as true early in the season as it was late in the season, anything that went wrong on offense was blamed on Russell Wilson. So the fans were conditioned to blame Russell Wilson, frankly, a lot more than they blamed him for 2022, when he had a much less effective season as a quarterback. He got less blame when he was less effective and more blame when he was more effective. That's the machinations of the coach. You had a coach who was kind of a doofus in 2022 and couldn't understand why. Heck, I'm giving Russell Wilson everything he wants. I'm giving him
how come he's not good?
Meeting room. How come he's not good?
Yeah, the situation with the Sutton is interesting too from a financial one, because keep this in mind. Now Sutton has the $2 million guarantee. His cap hit is it's about $17.4 million rounded up. But this is why it's probably going to end up with Courtland Sutton, among many reasons, in another uniform, because Courtland Sutton, were he to be released or were he to be traded, now that we are past June 1st, the Broncos will save about $10 million on the cap. In many ways, Sutton is actually worth more to the Broncos gone than he is on the team when you're talking about the rebuild from the financial standpoint,
right?
Because this team knows it's rebuilding. Sean Payton knows it's rebuilding. You'll save $10 million on the cap if you move on from Courtland Sutton. There aren't a lot of places the Broncos have been able to save cap money, but in that case, they can do it. But keep in mind now, with the way that the roster turnover is gone, top cap number on the team is Garrett Bowles. No guaranteed dollars left. Courtland Sutton has 2. DJ Jones, third highest cap number on the team. No guaranteed dollars. Zach Allen, 4th, $1.1 million guaranteed. Mike McGlinchey, 5th, $1.1 million guaranteed. 6th is Alex Singleton. He would have a $3 million guaranteed salary. That's already in there, and Singleton's not going anywhere. The next up, Tim Patrick, who got his new deal, 0. The Denver Broncos have cleared out the guys that would cost them money to move on from. And there is nothing keeping Sean Payton from moving on from them as they continue this roster turnover. It will continue. And I feel rather confident more and more by the day that it will end with Courtland Sutton playing in another uniform.
You really think he believes that this will be a transitional year in his own mind?
Payton.
Yeah. And also believes that the fans will accept it. The fans who have been told to be patient and wait for the good old days to return.
But now you got,
but not this year. But not this year.
You got a rookie, so
now,
you're going to have to give him a little honeymoon period, right?
Well, I don't know. Well, yeah, I mean, did the 12 other guys get honeymoon periods?
Fans
if
don't
they
think
did,
Bo Nix
not
is going
for
to
very,
lead into the
very
playoffs
long.
as a rookie, even though the ones
Why
wearing
not?
orange-colored glasses don't buy that.
Why not? Why not? With all the boasting they've done, see, I think you've got a coach, and maybe during this off season, slowly but surely, he's backed off. And maybe you're reading the situation correctly, and maybe a large share, I mean, fan reaction to anything is never unanimous.
You're also able to keep blaming some of the challenges on Russell Wilson because of the dead cap money for at least this year.
Well,
You'll be able
but
to.
He didn't sign himself to that deal. I mean, it strikes me that George Payton is the leading target to be scapegoated.
Yes.
In 2022, it was Nathaniel Hackett. In 2023, it was Russell Wilson. In 2024, it will be George Payton. I don't think there is any great love for any of those 3 people, either the one who's still around or the 2 who have long since been exiled from Denver. But I also think the fans are tired of hearing how happy they should be with 7-10, 8-9, when they've had 7 straight losing seasons to watch. And they're tired of hearing how spoiled they are, because most fans who listen to us, I know, are very well aware of the fact that no Super Bowl champion has gone nearly as long as Denver has without getting back to the playoffs again after winning said Super Bowl. And it's been 8 years, 7 straight losing seasons, and 8 years in a row out of the playoffs. And they look a little bit to the east and they see Kansas City building what might be termed, certainly by today's standards, a dynasty if they end up going to yet another Super Bowl. And on top of that, winning when they've already won the division for 8 straight years.
And nobody's ever won 3 in a row. I mean, that would be an unprecedented feat in the NFL.
Fans they don't have to be patient in Kansas City.
No, they don't. But
even when Tyreek Hill leaves.
One more year in Denver, they most certainly will. The question is, how do the Broncos manage that expectation? And Courtland Sutton's presence or lack thereof will be part of it, especially when it gets to mandatory minicamp next week. The Colorado Rockies have one of the best players in baseball, not just even in the month of May where he really shined, but overall, we'll talk more about that in a moment. But the beautiful weather has returned to Colorado. As you well know, if you've been out there, it's gorgeous. Summer's upon us already. You can feel it. And you know who else can feel it? Everyone else you're competing with to buy a home and move to Colorado, because as we know, people all over the country are trying to do it. This market's been crazy for years. It just goes up and up and up. And obviously you need some help navigating it. That's why you have to talk to my friends Dave and Marc at Key Real Estate Group's Colorado Luxury Home Team. It's the service I'm talking about when I say Colorado's Luxury Home Team, that high-end luxury service that you will get only from them, whether it's condos to castles, everything in between, when you're looking to buy home or looking to sell. Experts that know Colorado's market. They've had 25 years in the same offices, privately held. When I say you call Dave and Marc, you get Dave and Marc, not somebody else that's attached to them. It's a special group that you can rely on to handle your most important purchase in the exact way you'd want it handled. The Fed's still expected to lower interest rates as the year goes along, so beat the competition and buy your new home before that frenzy returns to Denver, and that's coming up quick. That warm weather has people out on the weekends looking for everything, so maybe you're thinking of a new build as everyone tries to catch up and build more new homes. That's not a bad idea either. Home builders are offering great incentives right now, but you want to make sure that you get all of them. So let Dave and Marc represent you, even with that new home build, to make sure that you get everything you deserve. Now that I've explained why you want to talk to Dave and Marc, here's how you do talk to Dave and Marc. Call them at the Key Real Estate Group today, 720-900-LIST. That's 720-900-LIST. Or you can visit them online at keyrealestategroup.com. Sandy, the rebuild for the Rockies, as we talked about last week a little bit, is actually working, assuming the people down at 20th and Blake understand they're rebuilding. I think they do. I hope they do. Regardless, they made the right choice, not only when they brought shortstop Ezequiel Tovar up, but when they gave him an extension after his impressive rookie season, because he's been even better. He might have been, overall, the Major League's best shortstop in May.
Oh, I think so. And no one, we were talking before we began today about this. I don't think anyone would question that whether it's March, April, or May, even in spring training, you could look at Ezequiel Tovar play shortstop and conclude that defensively he is virtually as good as it gets right now. Yeah. And there are other, of course,
96 fielding percentages
but
of shortstop.
He is immaculate as a shortstop. And one thing the Rockies have gotten right, generally speaking, over the years, is shortstops. Troy Tulowitzki got hurt too much, but he was brilliant when healthy. Trevor Story, the same thing. Same thing. And both excellent defensive shortstops, although bigger guys, especially Tulowitzki. Tovar is not a big guy. He is more of the Ozzie Smith type of build and skill when it comes to defensive play. But his improvement as a hitter has been dramatic. From April, perfectly good month, hit .290. Had an on-base plus slugging percentage of .759. In May, he hits .308 with an on-base plus slugging percentage of .863. There isn't a shortstop in baseball who had a better all-around offensive month in May than Ezequiel Tovar of the Colorado Rockies. When was the last time you could say that?
When
the
Story
best
or
player
Tulowitzki was
for
here?
A month at his position in all of Major League Baseball. And you say, well, there's Mookie Betts, and there's De La Cruz, and there's Adames in Milwaukee, and there's Volpe with the Yankees.
I mean, right now,
there's Gunnar Henderson, a great young shortstop, a slugging shortstop who has 19 home runs, right?
Yeah.
With the Baltimore Orioles at the moment. There's
third.
Bobby Witt Jr., who has a team that's playing, I believe, close to 600 baseball, and in second place in the American League Central, actually a pretty strong division apart from the White Sox.
Right.
That's a good division.
Oh,
every team has a positive run differential.
Right. Detroit's the only one under
Bobby Witt actually was one of the few shortstops whose on-base plus slugging numbers were better than Tovar's for the month of May. He's just a marvel. He is going to be phenomenal if he isn't already. He's a great player right now and a young player, 25 and under, one of the best young players in Major League Baseball. Corey Seager has been hurt for much of this season, had a good month of May, but did not reach 95 official at-bats. Of those who did, hard to beat the numbers, save for maybe Witt and Henderson, who play over in the American League, certainly in the National League, the best shortstop in May, even better than Betts, who is very good. Ezequiel Tovar, in my estimation.
And it's a big deal because when wins over replacement, which is a good catch-all stat, shortstop sort of being back to the glamour position that it had been for a really long time.
Very, very much so.
Wins above replacement, as you've talked about. Henderson leads all players. All. 4.1. Aaron Judge of the Yankees is second. But Henderson is at 1. Betts is at 3.
Yeah.
Witt is at 4.
Yes.
Volpe is at 10. Ezequiel Tovar and Corey Seager are at 18 and 19, respectively. Yeah. 5 of the top 20 players
are shortstops.
And for Tovar to be absolutely in the caliber of these guys, Henderson is a revelation, but we're talking about Bobby Witt Jr., who was sort of a post-hype jump for him, expected to be a star from the time he was drafted. Volpe, same thing. You're talking about the best of the best, and Tovar has put himself in that category in one season and a couple of months. That's remarkable.
Now, the only guy that you talked about who is not at the very least the most valuable player on his own team, and it's only because he plays on the same team with Judge and Soto, is Volpe. But Volpe is one of the top 10 players in baseball in terms of value.
2 and 6.
Right.
So 2, 6, and 10, by the way, for the Yankees.
But
in those 3 guys.
Tovar is the most valuable Rocky.
Oh, yeah.
Again, in my opinion, for the entire season,
Stats
not just for the month of May. Betts is the most valuable Dodger. Henderson is the most valuable Oriole. Witt is the most valuable Royal, with apologies maybe to Salvador Perez, who's having another amazing year as a catcher at 34.
Ketel Marte, best Diamondback.
Yeah.
Fair to say. Jaron Duran of the Red Sox, best other player in the Red Sox. William Contreras of the Brewers.
No, but I'm talking about shortstops now.
Right.
I'm talking about shortstops being the most valuable
best players on their entire team.
On their team, at the very least, if not MVP candidates. I mean, to me, Henderson and Witt, if their teams keep playing the way they are, I know their teams are not in first place, but rather in second, but both teams are going to be in the playoffs the way they're going.
And teams with low salaries.
Witt and Henderson are going to be MVP candidates in the American League this year. I'm not saying either one will win, but they will be candidates. They will be strong candidates. I think probably Mr. Judge has the edge at the moment in the MVP sweepstakes, as we're just past the 1/3 mark.
That is if Soto doesn't catch him. But you're exactly right, because it really has been a tremendous run for Tovar, who, early in the season, and I say early, it's still relatively early, I suppose. But Ryan McMahon had gotten off to the really great start, and Ryan McMahon is having an all-star caliber season.
He is. He's having a good year, and I think overall he's outslugging and getting on base certainly more than a lot more than Tovar is. But Tovar is the rising star, and the Rockies haven't had someone like that.
No, maybe
since Story. And even Arenado was around then, and Arenado was hands down the best player the Rockies had during the time that Story was here. Pretty much.
You're right.
And so I'm looking at Tovar. He's the one untouchable on the Rockies. He's the one guy you don't trade now. You don't trade in 5 years. You don't trade him in 10 years. He should be a Rocky for life. And it will be very interesting to see a few years from now, when the Rockies have to pay him,
they got ahead of that,
their attitude will be. And I know they got a little ahead of it.
Yeah.
They got a little ahead of it. But he's still going to be in his 20s when that contract expires.
Yeah, the Rockies gave him that extension that will sign him through the team through 2030. They tore up the arbitration years, which, by the way, really good idea when you see how those numbers tend to go.
3 now.
Tovar?
22.
22. Yeah. So
he'll still be in his 20s
younger,
when his contract.
He'll be, yeah, he will be. The contract takes him through his year 28 season. But think about this: when you look at the money that these guys get, very, very smart economical move for the Rockies. At 28 years old and at the 2030 season, he'll have made $16 million a year.
Yeah.
And then they have a club option to keep him for $23 million, which he will certainly exercise, assuming his career continues to go the way it is. So they get him right up until 30 when he'd become a free agent again, and they will have him signed at a number. If he plays like this, he will be literally exponentially more valuable than his contract in very short order.
Well, and I know he'll be more valuable. He'll be tremendously more expensive too. And the Rockies aren't famous for rewarding their own. They reward the Chris Bryants of the world with huge deals when they're over the hill, but they're not exactly well known for keeping their own guys happy. Holiday, Ubaldo. We can go
DJ
on.
LeMahieu,
yes,
Nolan Arenado.
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah, you could go on. But when you look at the idea of defensive play too, because remember, it is great with the Gunnar Hendersons of the world are fun, and he's not a butcher. He's 10th in fielding percentage. So I think when you take the offense,
no, he's known for offense.
You're fine. You're fine with that. But there's a difference when your fielding percentage at shortstop is 974 like Henderson or 973 for Witt, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But when you're getting up into the 996, one error in 260 chances, and you're the best in all of baseball, the other guys that are up there, good players, Arcia for the Braves, 987 is next. Carlos Correa for Minnesota, 986. Willie Adames, 986. Rocchio for Cleveland, 982. But given the offensive ability that continues to grow and the elite, best in baseball defensive ability, Tovar is special, and he is really continuing to grow substantially. Yes, he needs to take a few more pitches. Yes, he needs to get a better batting eye. But again, he's 22, and I would be more concerned if he wasn't improving, which he is actually improving, drawing more walks at this point in the season than he did at this point last year.
If he draws 30 walks this year, we'll throw a party for him. We'll throw a party for him right here.
It's
if he gets 30 walks.
Yeah, he's got
putting
10.
that out on the table. Danny Bailey will be in charge of the arrangements.
Yeah, he's got 10 right now. It's not a lot of walks, but that's kind of how it shakes out. The Rockies, by the way, and we talked about this on Friday, they take 1 of 3 from the Dodgers. Interestingly, they take Friday's game, a game in which
the game that Gomber didn't pitch.
Right. Dakota Hudson pitches it.
That Quantrill didn't pitch. And that's the game they win.
Quantrill and Gomber take the losses.
Get everybody's hopes up.
Yeah.
Because they won fairly handily on Friday.
4-1.
Right.
And then they scored one more run the rest of the weekend.
Shut them out. And then, went back to being the Rockies on the road offensively and scored 1 run for the remainder of the series on Saturday and Sunday. And Gomber and Quantrill did not pitch particularly
but not particularly poorly either.
No, but it's Dodger Stadium. Runs are going to be hard to come by. Even the Dodgers don't score nearly as many runs at home as they do on the road.
The Dodgers scored 9 runs in the 3 games.
Right.
The Dodgers.
And won 2 out of 3.
Right. So not that bad for the Rockies, honestly. Better teams.
No, the pitching's fine.
Yeah, better teams have come into LA and lost more than that to the Dodgers.
Overall, the pitching's fine.
They come back tonight, really quick trip out. They're back tonight for a 3-game set against the Reds. Ryan Feltner will take the hill against the Reds tonight. And then following the 3 in Cincinnati, a 7-game road trip to St. Louis and then to Minnesota. But not a bad performance for the Rockies, not a great performance for the Rockies, but things continue to look better for this team as the season goes along. At least if the idea is you're starting from the bottom and you're trying to point upward, at least things are going upward. That's a good sign as well for the Rockies. When you're talking about baseball in Colorado, by the way, the Rockies are where you start because it's the major leagues, but maybe you should be talking about Mark Johnson, the rest
best
of the
baseball
state.
Story, best sports story of the weekend by far.
Most certainly is. Dan Mohrmann at ColoradoPreps.com had all of the scoop on it, and we'll talk to him in just a moment after a message from our friends at Zaner Hardin Law.
No one ever plans to be part of a car accident. no one plans on major injuries coming out of a car accident. But if you've been involved in one, the people you need to turn to right away without hesitation are the good folks at Sainer Harden Law, Kurt Sainer, Marc Harden, the types of lawyers you want handling your case every time. Two of the most elite personal injury attorneys in Colorado and throughout the country. They've won nearly every award: Trial Lawyer of the Year, $1 Million Advocates, Super Lawyers, top 100 national trial lawyers. They handle the most important cases. They work tirelessly to make sure our community is a safe place, and they're respected, even with multi-million-dollar verdicts, by every insurance company around. You're lucky to have these guys right here in our backyard in the greater Denver metropolitan area. If you've been involved in an auto accident, reach out to Sainer Harden today at yourstorywill-be-told.com. That's yourstorywill-be-told.com.
Well, we had a chance to talk to him last week prior to the Colorado High School State Championships, and a lot of stories came out of that, including another run by Eaton, by the way. Mile High Sports' Anilo Piro's Holy Family got a title as well. So
which he has been constantly reminding us of.
His chest has been
very
a little
chesty.
Further puffed out
very chesty.
This afternoon. Of course, the former prep baseballer himself, Anilo Piro, for Holy Family. And joining us to talk a little bit about that and the remarkable run by Cherry Creek, a terrific story about it, by the way, in coloradopreps.com. If you haven't had a chance, is our friend Dan Mohrmann, the editor-in-chief of coloradopreps.com. Dan, thank you for coming back on with us, because while we had you on to preview these things, we were in a situation where going into 5A, Regis Jesuit had to win one game to win the championship. Cherry Creek had to win 3 to win the championship. Under skipper Marc Johnson, his 52nd season, knowing he was going to retire the next time Cherry Creek lost, they didn't. They won the whole thing. That is remarkable.
I'll tell you what, things got really weird on my end on Friday when I saw that Cherry Creek beat Grandview. And all of a sudden, I looked at my buddy Quentin Sikafus from 9 News. He and I were both up in Greeley working the 3A games. And I said, all year, we never knew when Marc Johnson's last day as Cherry Creek's baseball coach was coming. We do now. Tomorrow's it, win or lose. And it got me thinking. And so when I finally finished up all my work at 3A, Marc Johnson was so much on my mind that I sat down and penned that column. It was my way of saying thank you, because this is a guy who has worked tirelessly at the high school level just to impact 17 and 18-year-old kids. He told me the day he announced his retirement that he felt God made him to work with 17 and 18-year-olds, and he's had other chances to coach at higher levels.
Of course.
And he hasn't taken it. Oh, yeah. And
all kinds of chances.
The funny thing is, and I don't want to get too deep into what the conversation was, but I called Marc this morning because I wasn't able to be at All-Star Park. I actually had a plan to get there. If Eaton won and Cherry Creek won the first one, I thought I was going to pack up, do all my work for 3A down in Lakewood. Cherry Creek beat them too fast in that first game. It was 11-1, a 5-inning game. And then University was actually ahead.
The mercy rule came into effect, right?
Yep, the mercy rule came into effect. 5 innings. And then up where I was, University was beating Eaton. They were trying to end Eaton's 68-game win streak in that first championship game, and then Eaton walked him off in the bottom of the 7th. The one side note I'll give about that: the last time that Eaton was in that competitive of a state championship game was 2001 when they beat La Junta in 15 innings. So that was, that's remarkable in itself. But to see the way that everything unfolded at All-Star Park with Marc Johnson, it's one of those situations where what the ending of this story should be. And it's not too often that it plays out exactly the way it's supposed to. And when it does, as a sports fan, there's nothing more emotionally satisfying than that.
How much of a perfect convergence was this? Because you've had Marc Johnson, who for 52 years has been saying it's all about the players and it's all about my staff around me, the other coaches. And in the end, every player, every single one said they felt compelled to win for him. The perfect convergence of emotions and motivational elements. It all came together in a perfect way. They were playing for him, and he was, as always, coaching with their best interest in mind.
And that's exactly it, Sandy. I mean, you go back to that day that he announced his retirement in October, and you know, I can't help but look in the gallery and look at how the players are reacting to this, because it was such an historic moment for Colorado high school sports. And you can tell right there that they wanted to send him out on top. There's no better gift that you can give to a guy like that than to send him out with the way that they ended up doing. You know, so much was going to happen between then and this past Saturday that you didn't know that it was going to be the reality of it, but you knew that that was the goal from the player's side, for Marc's side. And this is what makes him such a great high school coach. Marc doesn't talk about championships. He never tells you at the beginning of the year, our goal is to win a state championship. His goal at the beginning of the year is to get the very best out that he can out of his 20, 25 players that are on that roster.
Isn't it funny that for the most part, the great all-time coaches never talk about winning very much? They talk about the process and the relationships and everything other than winning that's required to get to the point where you can win. But you never hear Marc Johnson talking about winning a fifth championship or a ninth championship in this case. Never.
So I would encourage everyone to go read Matt Meyer's story from Friday on coloradopreps.com, because he started it off every day, and he's still doing it this weekend. I noticed it yesterday, and I noticed it today. Marc Johnson every morning tweets a positive thought of the day.
Right.
And Matt referenced his positive thought of the day on Friday, which is, don't worry about the result, worry about the execution. The result will take care of itself. That's, you know, it's I'm paraphrasing obviously, but that played into everything, because they executed against Grandview. They executed the way that they needed to in that first game against Regis Jesuit. And then as things are stretching on, they executed in the right moments at the right time, the right way to come out with that win in that second game. And I'm sitting, you know, I needed Wi-Fi to get my work done to post everyone else's stories to write about Eaton. And so I'm sitting at an Old Chicago in Greeley, watching Game Changer, the score tracking app that you know was always helpful for high school baseball fans, and also the feed on the NFHS network. And you know, there's one idiot at the end of this bar top at Old Chicago in Greeley screaming into a computer, because I can't help it. As a sports fan, you want a story like Marc Johnson to end that way.
We're talking with Dan Mohrmann of coloradopreps.com, the editor-in-chief. You can follow him on social media at Dan Mohrmann. And the idea behind Johnson's message, as a former prep baseball player myself, one of the hardest things to learn, and it's not only positivity for life, but it's one of those baseball lessons, right? Because in baseball, you can wait on your pitch. You can take the pitches. You can foul a couple pitches off. You can get your pitch like you're supposed to. You could drive it, and you can happen to drive it right to the left fielder. You did nothing wrong. You did everything right, but the result isn't what you wanted. Well, that's baseball, and that's life. You can't control the outcome necessarily. That's not all in your hands. What is the process that you follow and the way you execute the process and the plan. And that's basically baseball in a nutshell. But the way that the Johnson approaches that with high school kids, I think is so incredibly important. And the litany of ex-players who will come back and talk about the impact that he had for the way they approach, not only the way they played to continue to play baseball, but just the way you approach life. That's what a good coach can do when they hit you at the right time in your development as a teenager.
And that was Marc's goal in life as a teacher coach. And that's, you know, what he called himself a couple of times when we were chatting today was he was a teacher coach, and his baseball is kind of his vessel to help kids with what they need to figure out in life. And you can understand how impactful he is at that when players across 5 decades of his teams are flying into town the day of that game to pack All-Star Park. And I didn't have a chance to see that atmosphere firsthand, but the general gist of what I've heard is that All-Star Park was way, way, way too small for that. I would have liked to see, this it's such a hard thing to do in that very instant, but I would have loved to see the Rockies, since they were on the road, call and say, you know what, use our house.
Yeah.
You're going to have a packed house, use ours, go for it. But it's way more complicated than that just coming to fruition. So, but he had so many people show up to support him. And it's because of that very idea, Shawn, that he didn't help them become better baseball players. He helped them become better human beings.
Right.
And when you find that person in your life that's kind of helped you with that, you are always going to feel a little indebted to what they're doing. And so when you have a chance to support a guy like Marc, when you know it's his last game, when there's a state championship on the line, there's not going to be a lot that keeps you from something like that.
Only the tiniest percentage of prep baseball players will ever either play on scholarship in college or at the pro level at all. At the tiniest amount. And so
but he had 450.
Yeah.
Right?
He had over 400, Sandy.
80 draft picks. And just remarkable. But they weren't the only ones who came back.
Mm-hmm.
There were people who weren't collegiates, who weren't drafted, who came back to support.
Yeah, there were whatever, bankers, doctors, lawyers, whatever they went on to do.
And all the way back to the 70s when he started.
Yep. Remarkable story. And for Cherry Creek, their 9th championship, of course, and that's obviously a big story. But we do want to give a shout out. I mentioned it before to Eaton, who did complete their run, as we talked about before. If I'm not mistaken, Dan, the first ever team in Colorado to win 4 consecutive titles, not once but twice.
No, so there are 4 programs that have done it. They're the second program to do it twice. So Revere, which is now locked in with Sedgwick County and all that, they did it twice. Eaton has now done it twice, but Cherry Creek, Mark Johnson, he won 4 in a row back, I believe it was in the 90s. And then Rocky Mountain in those probably early 2010 teams with Marco Gonzalez, I think they rattled off 4 straight state titles. So 69 game winning streak now, which I mean is incredible, by far a state record. And Todd Hernandez, their head coach, actually gave me a great line. Gave all of us a great line on Saturday. He said, sometimes people will try to go up Mount Everest just so they can see people bring the dead bodies down, and people want to see us come back down the mountain. We want to go to Mount Everest, and we want to make sure that we're sitting up there with our flag planted. So I don't know if you're going to see them slow down anytime soon.
It certainly doesn't seem like it, obviously. So, I mean, when you look at this baseball tournament on the whole, obviously all these levels, it seems like maybe there was a little bit more for everybody than in some previous years. How does the sport build itself into the idea where we can get back to fans showing up and watching some preps baseball when the playoffs and we get into these championship weekends again? Can this momentum carry on?
Well, I mean, you always hope so. I think the reality of it, Shawn, is you get great stories like this every year. You're not going to get a Mark Johnson who's been around for 5 decades all that often, but every single year there's going to be a fantastic story out of the state baseball championships, out of state basketball. The problem, coming from the guy who works in preps, is that I would say as a whole, not everyone does a great job of chasing those stories and bringing those stories to the forefront of it. I was jokingly going to send out a tweet, and it's in one of my, I don't know if I'm getting defensive or just trying to be a smart aleck, but I wanted to thank everyone in the rest of media for stopping or for hopping on board the preps train for the weekend, and tell them that they're welcome anytime. I pulled myself back. I didn't want to be that guy, even though I just, kind of revealed myself on air here. But what I love about preps, and I told Marc this today when he told me that, God made him to do what he did for 17 and 18-year-old kids. It was something that when he told me that back in October, I started to relate to, because I think from a career standpoint, I'm exactly where I need to be, because these kids need someone to tell their stories, and I love being that guy.
Well, where he is being the foremost person in that arena. It's Dan Mohrmann, the editor-in-chief of ColoradoPreps.com. Make sure you go to ColoradoPreps.com and grab the app while you're at it and check out all the latest. The terrific story that Dan wrote on Marc Johnson is available there right now. Dan, thanks so much. Looking forward to, by the way, his little tease for everybody this week. The new magazine comes out. Dan has a few stories in that as well that you do not want to miss. Thanks for coming back and breaking down this remarkable story with us, because you're right. You don't have a lot of coaches hang around for half a century and finish with storybook endings. So we had to have you back to talk about it again. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Dan.
And I was happy to do it. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, Dan Mohrmann, joining us. Yeah, just a remarkable run. And congratulations to Coach Johnson. Congratulations to all the kids who won titles. Obviously, the group had been eaten 69-game winning streak in baseball. That's ridiculous. I mean, they're talking about some phenomenal talent, and you can catch up on all of it at Colorado Preps.
You were not alive when Marc Johnson began coaching.
Oh,
I was 15 years old when Marc Johnson began coaching.
Wow. I mean, think about that, folks. And Dan wasn't either, by the way, wasn't alive either. So, I mean, you were talking. And Danny Bailey, I'm not sure Danny Bailey's parents were alive. I don't even know.
I don't
Speaking of Danny Bailey, of course, his Colorado Buffaloes on the ESPN FPI rankings have a surprisingly lofty number. We'll tell you more about that in a minute, but I want to remind you that in the last few years, of course, sports betting has been almost overwhelming in the last 4 years in which it's been legal in Colorado. So many sports books are available. You've heard all the ads. You've seen all the ads. They can be so many that it can be confusing and overwhelming, and you can get frustrated with it. We get that. So we're going to add one more to the pile, and you think, well, great, Shawn. No, well, this is designed to make it easier on you. Mile High Sports has gathered all of the best sign-up bonuses and offers and put them all on one page on our website. We wanted to make it easy for folks who are interested in getting into the sports betting world to find the best options for them, because it's not necessarily the best options for everybody. It's not one size fits all. It depends on what's best for you. We try to find all those bonuses and offers, and we put them on one page. It's easy to get, simple to then sort through it. Bonus bets, second chance bets, deposit matches, all of it, all in one place. Easy to find. Go to milehighsports.com, or you can download our mobile app and then just click on Colorado Sports Betting. They'll all be there, arrayed with all the different books, all the different offers, in an easy way for you to sort through and find out the best way for you to jump into the sports betting world in the way you want to do it. It's just that simple, and that's the plan. Think of it as your bonus from your friends at Mile High Sports. Sandy, the ESPN Power Football Index has come out for the upcoming college football season. We talked a little bit about where it had the Denver Broncos last week. Not good, but the situation for the Buffs may be a little pie in the sky. And ESPN has them ranked at number 36 in the country. Look, I'm viewing a Buffalo. I don't believe for a second they're the 36th best team in the country. I highly doubt you do as well.
I don't believe it. I don't know exactly what the basis would be for figuring out formulaically exactly how there are only 35 teams ahead of them and about, twice as many teams behind them.
Right.
And
I'm
not sure I can figure that one.
A lot of it, when they did their FPI on offense, the Buffs ended up number 16 because obviously Shedeur Sanders had a very good
and
year.
Travis Hunter is coming back.
Right. And both of them will be back. And that's probably the main thing. That 16th overall in offense, the defense obviously quite a bit below that, but more talent coming in, a lot of new coaching, apparently still optimistic there. Also the schedule 45th in the country in the Pac-12 last year, obviously, with as heavily loaded as it was with top teams. They had a much tougher schedule, according to at least FPI for ESPN's projections. So I get how they're getting to where they're getting, but we've talked about the turnover in the coaching staff. We've talked about the turnover on the roster. And for the most part, I think they are getting better, and they're getting bigger, and they're getting faster, and they are improving the talent. But there's also concerns that we've discussed. We had Shawn Keeler of the Denver Post on last week talking about how all this has to gel. And if they don't have time to do that, Sandy, it's tough to think that in the Big 12, which is not full of pushovers by any stretch, it's tough to think that they're going to be that good. As a matter of fact, get this, the projected win-loss total, and of course it's not direct because they do it in decimal points because it's a simulation. 6.3, and yet came up number 36 in FPI ranking. That's a little confusing.
I'm not sure I grasp that because don't they play 12 games?
Yep.
And that would be 6-6.
Yep.
And a 6-6 team is in the top 50. Forget about top 36, top 50.
According to ESPN's
Really?
Power Football,
Wow.
Football Power Index.
I'd love to see the teams below them.
Yeah.
Then, and how many of those teams are projected to win 7 games, 8 games?
They came up with some interesting things. The most likely team to make the college football playoff,
Right,
outside of a Power 5 team, the UTSA Roadrunners.
right.
Okay, maybe. The likeliest winner of the Big 12 that would make a playoff, Kansas at 1.1.
Well,
I mean, Oklahoma.
They have
and
a
Texas
quarterback coming back who was hurt all of last
remember,
year, and he's pretty good.
Oklahoma and Texas are out.
Yeah.
They've now moved on. That changes things. I get that. But it's going to be a transition year for the Big 12, and perhaps CU can take advantage of that. But I look at some of it and go, okay,
Utah's in the Big 12.
Yes, correct. Arizona State, Utah, Colorado.
Their football program disappear, or are they ranked ahead of CU?
Yeah, it's
FPI.
It's a fascinating situation because I get what they're trying to do. At the same time, it feels as if there's. And that's why I think it's so tough to look at the Buffaloes. There is a lot of talent. There is a lot of skill coming in, but so much of it, well, when they talk about Football Power Index, is projection, right? Well, projection is the challenge with the Buffs because how many of the new arrivals can immediately play and be effective? How many of the new coaches can grab all these new guys and make them effective? You're talking about Livingston as a first-time DC. Pat Shurmur is the offensive coordinator, but we've seen Pat Shurmur. Is he going to make some quantum leap forward at this stage in his career? I wouldn't think so. Warren Sapp is a graduate assistant, but he's never coached. There's so many question marks. Is it possible that this all comes together and the Buffs easily win 6 and maybe even 1 or 2 more and make themselves interesting? Yes. But every time you're betting on a whole bunch of things going right and very few things going wrong, the world of sports has a way of making sure that evens out.
Well, I think you have to see their first 3 games too to really have a sense, because now they've got to go on the road and play Nebraska in Lincoln, play Colorado State with a whole lot of eyeballs on them in Fort Collins. And I don't think the first game of the season is an automatic W.
Here in the Big 12, here's the FPI, that power index in order.
Yes.
Kansas,
right.
Kansas State, Arizona, Oklahoma State, Utah, Texas Tech, TCU, UCF, West Virginia, Colorado.
So they're not even in the first division.
No, they like the Big 12.
Maybe middle of the pack.
They like the conference.
Yeah.
But on the whole, no. So
that's a whole bunch of teams within just the Big 12.
That's where I look at 36 that it ends up being really
fascinating.
So I'm not sold on that myself.
I don't think they play any of those teams who are ahead of them.
Right. That's one of the challenge. As you expect, Georgia on top, Oregon,
yes.
Number 2, Texas, number 3, Ohio State, number 4, Alabama, post Nick Saban, number 5.
Yeah, but they got the quarterback coming back. And it's always good news when you have a proven quarterback coming back.
Well, and the truth is you have a proven coach, even though he's not Nick Saban.
No. He's
Caleb
not
DeBoer's
Nick
an
Saban, but
coach.
he's an outstanding coach. Just look at his lifetime win percentage.
Right. Yeah. Wow, dude, it's amazing. Actually, you'll think it's a typo.
That was a great hire by Alabama.
Yeah.
By the way, the departure of Saban was not entirely unexpected, but he made his final choice literally just hours before the announcement came down.
Saban, by the way, one of the finalists to be inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame. You didn't have to wait very long for that.
Urban Meyer, a finalist. Who else? Aaron Donald, a finalist.
Aaron Donald,
this year.
right? Yeah. There's
out of Pitt, right?
Yeah.
Aaron Donald.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously there's some interesting names there, but it 36 to me just seems sort of remarkably high. And then the rest of their numbers don't seem to fit.
Yes. It
so
doesn't
that part's just
fit.
weird.
This does not compute.
Right.
We're talking about
computer rankings.
A formula,
and it doesn't
computer
compute.
rankings, and it doesn't compute.
But good sign for the Big 12 in general, however. The news coming out over the weekend that the Big 12 is going to distribute a record $470 million to its member schools. Now, of course, that does not CU, Arizona State, Utah do not get any part of that. That will start coming next year when you're talking about the revenue sharing. But even though you're talking about first-year teams that have joined BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF, they get $18 million apiece, and the teams that still return get more than they ever have. Commissioner Brett Yormark has done a really good job of building this conference, and it is not the SEC, and it is not the Big Ten, but it is not far behind them. And interestingly, it's actually closing. And while it won't in football, I do wonder if basketball, in which I think it's the best, and you do too, the best conference in the country, is going to help continue to close that gap overall when you're talking about the Power 5 conferences.
I agree with that. I'm just trying to get my head around the idea that Kansas is the favorite to win the Big 12.
Yep.
In football. Maybe they're the favorite in basketball preseason, but I don't know that I'd pick them to win the Big 12 on the basketball side. It's interesting that the football program right now for this coming year may be as promising as the basketball.
Yeah, how about that? So it's an interesting spot. But yeah, you look at the depth overall, when you're looking at that ranking with the Buffs at 36, there are a ton of teams. So the conference maybe is tougher than you might think. But yeah, Kansas projected to win 8.7 games. K-State with 8.4, Arizona 7.9, Utah 7.8. You mentioned where they were at. Texas Tech and Oklahoma at 7.6. UCF at 7.4, TCU at 7, and then in that mix of sixes, 6.6 for Iowa State, 6.3 for West Virginia, 6.3 for the Buffs. For the Buffs, I think you can't get to 6.3, obviously, but 6, I think, would be not only a good year. The problem is it's probably also what they have to hit. It's the low water mark, or the season's going to be considered a failure.
We disagreed slightly on what the expectation should be for the Broncos this year. I think the realistic expectation is, yes, more along the lines of 5 wins, 6 wins, maybe. I think after 7 straight losing seasons, though, you have to aspire to more like 8 or 9 wins, even if you don't make the playoffs. But for the Buffs, to me, it's crystal clear.
Bowl or bust.
Especially after starting 3-0 last year and having a shot at starting at least 2-1 this year. You got to get to 6 in 2024.
Got to find a way to do it. It's got to happen.
There's been too much talk. I think ill-conceived, but still a lot of talk about being better than that. I know they backed off to a degree, and now they're saying, well, we'll be a bowl team this year. My reading of their season ahead is that they had better be a bowl team this year, or you do begin to question the foundation that's being laid by Deion Sanders.
And we'll have to look at it as the season goes along, because then the other argument is the idea, Deion Sanders might move along. What if they don't make a bowl? Who's going to bring Deion Sanders
who would hire him? Now,
in?
As we've suggested,
it's going to be fascinating.
He could move on, but move on to a job other than a head coaching job. Right. Something having little or nothing to do with football, but everything to do with branding.
Yes. If it's football, Deion Sanders is head coach or nothing. I think that's very straightforward. So it'll be fascinating. And if that's where he wants to stay, I'm with you. It is kind of bowl or bust as it stands at the moment. Of course, the Stanley Cup Finals are set. We'll talk more about that in a moment, because this is the Stanley Cup Finals match you deserve. Trust me, we have some numbers. But I want to remind you, by the way, that coming up in just about a month, the 4th annual Colorado Whiskey Fest is coming to the Douglas County Fairgrounds. That's Saturday, July 13th. Food, wine, beer, spirits, and vendors will all be on site, including more than 50 different whiskey vendors. The festival will take place from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Live music from the Kevin Austin Band and Mojo Filter. Tickets are available online. And if you use promo code, you'll save $15. It's the Colorado Whiskey Fest. And you're talking about a fun event. Obviously, you must be 21 or older. Keep in mind, this isn't, it's a whiskey fest. Not bringing your strollers, not bringing your wagons, not bringing your pets. Make sure you're an adult and you can go check it out. But if you do want to do that, you can go to whiskeyfestcolorado.com. Use Mile High Sports. Use that MHS code. MHS will save you $15 on your ticket. So get ahead of it. This is likely to be a sellout down there. Those events down at the Douglas County Fairgrounds are a tremendous amount of fun. I've been to a few. I've emceed a few. I've hosted a few charity and otherwise. And so this one will be a blast. So July 13th. The Colorado Whiskey Fest, 4th annual. Check it out at whiskeyfestcolorado.com. Promo code MHS to save yourself $15. Talked about the Stanley Cup matchup that I think hockey fans deserve. I know for Avalanche fans, a little bittersweet. But we have such a fascinating contrast in teams. In the Edmonton Oilers, by the way, trying to be the first Canadian team to win the Stanley Cup since, believe it or not, folks, the 92-93 season when the Montreal Canadiens knocked off the Kings.
And Patrick Roy was as great as he's ever been, including during 2 Stanley Cup runs with the Colorado Avalanche. In 1993, I think the Canadiens, over the course of their playoff run, won 10 straight overtime games, which is incredible.
Yikes.
And I agree with you that for the hockey purist, this is a dream final.
Yeah.
Because you have Connor McDavid,
best player on the planet,
who for the better part of a decade has been the best player against a team that is as stifling defensively as I've seen in the last decade in the NHL.
How about this? So to give you an idea of how outlandish this really is, here's the numbers of in the regular season. Expected goals for the Oilers, number 1. Expected goals against the Panthers, number 1. Scoring chances, Oilers offense, number 1. Panthers defense, number 1. High danger chances, you're starting to get the idea, 1 and 1. Shots from the slot, 1 and 1. Passes towards the slot, the Oilers were second, but the Panthers allowed the fewest. Possession time on offense within the opposing zone, Oilers first. Panthers defense, second in disallowing it. You're talking about your textbook immovable object and irresistible force with these two teams. And it will either be the coronation for Connor McDavid, the final piece of the puzzle, or for the Florida Panthers, who just missed walking away with the cup last year, validation of a team that basically checks every box you want.
And for Gary Bettman, a degree of validation. I am old enough, and I think you are too, to remember when people laughed at the idea of the NHL planning franchises in the state of Florida.
Right.
Especially in Sunrise, what is now Sunrise, not Miami anymore. Right. Florida Panthers play out of Sunrise, Florida, a reasonably small community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of outside of
5 straight years now in the Stanley Cup Final, you've had a Florida team. 3 straight for Tampa and 2 straight now for Florida. Now, Florida lost last year. Tampa Bay lost the year before to the Avs. But 5 straight years with the Florida team coming out of the East.
Wow, remarkable. We talked about this team all year, too, by the way, because the Panthers clearly, and the Rangers certainly had their run. We talked about really 3 teams in the East, I think, over the course of the year. We did talk about the Rangers. We talked about the Carolina Hurricanes, who for a long time just were metronome consistent. But Florida was always that team. Every month, it seems like they were, big 10-win months, like clockwork. All 4 of their lines doing their jobs. They can score. Their defense is good, and they have a goaltender in Sergei Bobrovsky, who was every bit Shesterkin's match in the conference final. For the most part, I thought he was really, really good.
Shesterkin was really, though, the most valuable player. And Bobrovsky probably is the second best goaltender in the league right now based on form. I have no doubt that we saw the 2 best goaltenders in the game playing in the Eastern Conference Final. But I'm beginning to question the long-held assumption that the hot goaltender is the most important factor. You just touched on it.
Yeah.
Depth, 4 lines, rolling 4 lines over and over again. And they're all physical. And they're all able to score. And old friend Evan Rodriguez
right.
is a key guy as a glue player, a grinder for this Florida team, but they have a bunch of guys like that. And I think as two-way players go, with respect to Tkachuk and Barkov, they've got two of the best in the game. They're very, very underrated. And remember last year, they were not supposed to get to the final. Now they did, and they lost to Vegas, which was very disappointing because they had beaten a team that was the greatest regular season team in the history of hockey last year. Speaking of President Trophies, you talk about being the best team during the regular season in hockey. This is now yet again another year that's gone by with a President Trophy winner losing and not even getting the Stanley Cup Final, much less winning the Stanley Cup. And you see how it breaks down. The 8 teams who have won both the President's Trophy and the Stanley Cup: Edmonton 87, Calgary 89, Rangers 94, Dallas 99, Avs 01, Detroit 02. But since 02, all you have is Detroit in 08 and Chicago in 2013. It's been 11 years now without a President's Trophy winner winning the Stanley Cup. That is unbelievable to me. And the last team that won the President's Trophy over an 82-game season and won the Stanley Cup, Detroit, 16 years ago. Doesn't mean anything. And I think a lot of these teams, I mean, the Rangers lost 10 years ago in the final to the Kings, and they had Lundqvist, who was great in that series. But the Kings' depth, and Jonathan Quick, who is now the Rangers' backup goaltender, ironically, to Shesterkin. But having Quick certainly helped. But having more depth on the Rangers. And I'm watching Florida and the Rangers the other night, and I'm thinking of Dallas Avs, and I'm even thinking last night, Edmonton was deeper than Dallas.
But to your point, that Kings team with Quick, wasn't that team an 8 seed?
Yes.
It was an 8 seed that won the Stanley Cup, and that's happened more than once.
Let's remember 2 things about Edmonton. Early in the season, they got off to a terrible start. They fired their coach, Jay Woodruff. Knobloch's now the coach.
Right.
So they've had 2 head coaches this year. During the Stanley Cup playoffs, they've had 2 starting goaltenders because they benched Skinner earlier in the playoffs. Now they went back to Skinner, and Skinner was phenomenal late in the series, and especially last night. I mean, Edmonton scored, I believe, on 2 of its first 3 shots and hardly shot the puck at all after that for the rest of the game, and ended up getting outshot, 3.5 to 1? 35 to 10, something like that.
And the Oilers,
the final shots on goal. It isn't just goaltending. It's depth now. And I think, you know why I think it isn't just goaltending? Because I think the teams are better balanced. There are no real dynasties anymore in the NHL. Teams have more balance, and the teams that get tired chasing the President's Trophy during the season, and maybe they're a little front-loaded, and you can get by with that during the regular season. During the playoffs, it's more about depth, and those teams are just tired.
Yeah.
The Rangers look tired to me, and everybody was screaming PK Subban and others about how the Rangers stars weren't producing. They had to get going. Well, they were saying the same thing about the Avalanche at the end of the year, too, to some degree.
Right.
That the big guns, at least in some cases, weren't producing the way they should. They were dog tired.
And that's
dog tired.
That's one of the problems I have with some of the analysis.
Florida wasn't tired.
And I'm not picking on Subban or anyone else, but I think that's when you start running into the situations where it gets a little simplistic there. That's the better term. I was going to use another one, and I'm glad I didn't. More simplistic. The idea is
I can't wait to hear the other one.
It starts with an L. But the idea is it ends with a Y. But anyway, this idea that these guys just aren't producing enough in the playoffs. Well, why? What's the assertion? There's not enough. There's not enough heart. You kind of heard that at the end of Dell's season. They just don't have enough fire. They don't have enough. No, that's not a reason. Guys don't play the whole season killing themselves out there on the ice for that to get into critical playoff games and be like, I'm not really feeling it tonight. That's not a thing. There's obviously reasons for it. And it's usually, one, the other team. That's usually the reason. And two, if it's not, they're exhausted. They're run down. It's fatigue. You've said it for years. Fatigue is cumulative.
Yes.
The cure to that is depth. But in Edmonton's case, they are more than McDavid and Draisaitl.
Finally.
But they are not Florida. They are not anybody's idea of a deep team. Is this an idea where just a transcendent all-time player is enough to take a lesser team?
I thought
is this John Elway with the Broncos in the first couple Super Bowls?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. I think they have gotten deeper, actually. And they've been very creative about, depending on the situation, combining Draisaitl and McDavid, splitting them apart. You've got Hyman, who's a big-time goal scorer, but you may not be in love with everything that Corey Perry represents, but he's one of those guys. Winning kind of seems to follow him around, and he's one of those glue guys, and they have more guys like that. They have him on defense for sure, and I think even among their forwards, they have it. And they were using everybody. I mean, McDavid wasn't playing 27, 28 minutes.
Right.
He was playing a lot. He was playing more than a third of the game. But look at the way they won last night. I don't know what the final shot count was, but it couldn't have been much more than 10. They won 2-1. They didn't win 5-4. You're thinking, Edmonton. The only way Edmonton wins is every game is three goals or more that it takes to win. Edmonton was a little like DU in college hockey this year. They learned how to win low-scoring games in the playoffs.
And Edmonton
games
did finish
they didn't win during
with
the year.
10 shots to Dallas's
10
34.
shots to 34 for Dallas.
They were out hit 31-15.
Yeah. Well, but they managed the game. When you're up 2-0, with Edmonton, and even in this series, both teams blew 2-goal leads. But last night, the surest thing to me of the weekend, once Edmonton got up early 2-0 on its first 3 shots, was that Edmonton was going to win that game.
And then that would
there was no way Dallas was going to get to 3 goals.
That would be
Dallas was lucky to get 1. They got 1 late, and it was kind of interesting. Once they got the 1, because there was a minute 40, I think, left, or a minute 39 when they got the 1. But there was no question that Edmonton was the better team, the fresher team, the stronger team. And, you can say Dallas took the Avs out in 6, and, the Avs should have won, or at least should have taken it to 7 games. I think that series took something out of Dallas, too.
Oh, I think it did, certainly. But Edmonton, at least, the other thing to keep in mind is, it's more than just McDavid. But my, simplistic suggestion to Florida, don't take too many penalties. Dallas.
Not a good idea.
Dallas took.
The one thing they've always had is a great power play.
Dallas took 2 penalties in that game.
Yeah.
In the first period.
The
problem is Edmonton scored 2 goals because their power play includes Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl and Evan Bouchard and Zach Hyman, and those guys will bury you if you give them the extra man. The numbers, and you talk about the depth in there. Think about this: the top scorer for Florida in its 17 games is Tkachuk with 19 points. Barkov and Verhaeghe have 17 apiece. In the 18 games, McDavid 31 points. Draisaitl 28, Bouchard 27, Nugent Hopkins 20. That's the top 4 scorers in the playoffs.
Right.
Period.
Right. But the other guys defend, and they do lean heavily on their power play, and their power play comes through when it matters. This year in the playoffs, he's been there, McDavid has, for 9 years. You know how many times they won more than 50 games?
And they didn't this year.
That would be 0. Yep. You know how many times they won 50 games on the nose? That would be once. And it wasn't this year.
If they were to win the Stanley Cup, be the first Canadian team to win in 30 years, 31 to be
31.
precise. And McDavid, a walking, talking wing of the Hall of Fame by himself,
Yes.
is the guy that gets him over the hump. That man is going to be a legend in Canada, maybe behind Mario Lemieux and Wayne Gretzky. And that's about it.
I think
that's about it.
I think, yes, if they win the cup, then you begin to talk about all-time greatness. Yeah. And remember, it's Edmonton we're talking about here, where a guy like Gretzky
played once
played, right?
Yep.
But I even think if they don't win, this is a guy who has won 3 Hart trophies. There are only 9 players in hockey history that have won 3 or more, and he could win it again. I don't think he'll win this year, but I do think he will win more Hart trophies, plural.
Well, it is interesting when you look at the idea of
27.
building it. That's the amazing part. He's just
9 years, and he's 27.
Just entering his prime. Yikes. But in the NBA, the league that was renowned for dynasties. I mean, that's how you defined the NBA finals, literally for decades, for certainly all of David Stern's administration as the commissioner. Dynasties were what the NBA wanted to build. Not so much anymore. We'll talk about that in a moment. When we're trying to catch up on the NBA, you could do a lot worse than the podcast that we have here at Mile High Sports.
Absolutely. And when we talk about our own podcasts here on Mile High Sports, we're very happy, obviously, that you take the time to listen to us and watch us on demand whenever it fits your schedule. But we have many more podcasts, and I'll just name a few. Ryan Blackburn on the Nuggets with Pickaxe and Roll. Arav Dean on the Avalanche with Hockey Mountain High. Mile High baseball fans know they get the latest on the Rockies with Drew Kreisman and the 20th and Blake podcast. And as always, we have our friend Troy Renk from the Denver Post with the Broncos podcast, answering and opining on any and all Bronco-related issues. Our friend from the Denver Post featured on the Mile High Sports Podcast Network. All that and much, much more. Just search Mile High Sports wherever you get your podcasts.
In the NBA now with the finals and Dallas going up against Boston. Boston, of course, has been expected to be in this finals all year long, and they're here. They do look like the better team. They look like the more complete team, though they do have a sort of an odd tendency to not show up at inopportune times. And Dallas with Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, maybe quite the opposite, maybe not as impressive overall, but in the opportune times, boy, do those guys step up. So it's a fascinating matchup. But the part that is really interesting, Sandy, is as you and I were talking over the weekend, is the idea that for now, 6 consecutive seasons, the NBA champion will be a different team. The Denver Nuggets, of course, won last year. Golden State before that, beating Boston. The Milwaukee Bucks knocked off the Phoenix Suns the year before that. The Lakers beat the Heat in the bubble. Toronto Raptors beat the Golden State Warriors. Boston or Dallas, either way, that's 6 different champs in 6 different seasons. The NBA, when you have to go back, you'd have to go back an extraordinary amount of time to even see an era in which it was close to that. And the truth of the matter is, if you're going to look at the modern NBA, which starts in 1947, it's never happened, ever. Is parity finally at the NBA? And is that a good thing?
Well, I think the real question is whether we're very much in the midst of an era of parity, or are we kind of coming out of it? And Boston is the team that will provide us, I think, to a large degree, with that answer. Mm-hmm. If Boston wins, you start to look at the last 3 years, and Boston's been by far the best team. If they win, because they will have lost to Golden State in 2022 in the NBA Finals, the kind of last gasp of the Warriors, 4 titles in 8 years, their dynasty, and kind of the final hurrah for their core guys, particularly Curry, Green, and Klay Thompson. Boston will have lost the NBA Finals 4-2 to Golden State, lost in the Eastern Conference Finals in 7 games to Miami last year, and you could argue if Jason Tatum doesn't turn his ankle in the early minutes of the game, maybe it's a Boston-Denver final, which everyone expected a year ago. This year, Boston makes it to the finals, but the Nuggets don't. And so I think if either of these teams win, it'll be 6 different champs in 6 years.
No matter what.
Dallas hasn't won during that time,
and
obviously.
It's never happened.
And Boston hasn't yet won a title, and you're right, there's still questions. I remember growing up and falling in love with the NBA during the 1970s and through almost the entire 1980s, through 1987. So it was really 1970 through 1987, where you began to have different champions. No one repeated. And Pat Riley finally in 87, when the Lakers won, dared to mention the idea of repeating in the locker room, and his players weren't necessarily thrilled with that, but they did finally repeat. And then we got into, Showtime Lakers became kind of in the 80s a dynasty. Even Boston won 3 titles, and then the Bulls won, and then the Lakers had a nice stretch again, and it became, you're right, in the Stern years, it was all about great teams and dynasty. Detroit, the Bad Boys, won 2 years in a row. Maybe not quite a dynasty, but heck, they were in the finals for 3 straight years, lost to the Lakers, and then won the next 2 years in a row. That would qualify today as a dynasty for sure. So I think that's the question.
With these back-to-back champs, or 3 and 4 years, or whatever.
But we know the rules now. The new CBA.
It is the salary cap that's really changed things.
Yes, but it incentivizes even the most free spending of teams to limit themselves to maybe a year or so, 2 years tops above the second apron before they have to pull back, because the penalties are so severe as you get to that second apron.
And at the same time,
it.
It encourages teams, because of bird rights and the way you can exceed aprons and things like that to retain your own players, that when you are a lower dollar team, the Denver Nuggets, for example, right? Not normally competing with the Lakers or the Celtics or of the world. It allows you to retain, you've drafted right. You drafted Nikola Jokic, you drafted Jamal Murray, you drafted Michael Porter Jr. You can go forward with that, and you don't have to worry about losing them to the big cities just because they're the big cities. You're allowed to do more than you ever did.
But that's the irony now.
So now if you draft well,
are now one of the halves.
They are. But if you draft well, you can go up. And that, to me, that's where it's interesting. It is great for the NBA. It is great for the Denver Nuggets, because I don't think without this CBA, the Denver Nuggets win a championship.
Maybe not.
The problem is, because of that same CBA, it's a really good chance that the Nuggets aren't going to win another one anytime soon.
That's the truth. And Boston might. Boston won 64 games this year. It was 6 years ago that Houston won 65, and nobody's won anywhere near 65 in a single season.
The Nuggets were better last year than the year prior, and they didn't finish first.
They had the 5th best scoring margin. I'm talking about Boston now, for all their supposed flaws. 5th best scoring margin ever in the history of the sport, plus 11.3. In the playoffs, they've been almost as good as that, but plus 11.3. OKC was second, plus 7.4. Minnesota, 6.5, was third. That's overwhelming dominance. Plus 10.9 in the playoffs, 12-2 in the playoffs, first in playoff offense, third in playoff defense. And Porzingis has been out the last 2 rounds. That's a key guy out of the lineup. People talk about, well, the Clippers didn't have Kawhi, and the Knicks didn't have Randall, among others. Milwaukee didn't have Giannis. Cavs didn't have Allen. The Pacers didn't have Halliburton for the last few games. So Boston benefited, especially against Cleveland and Indiana, from their having injuries. But Boston didn't have Porzingis. And just because they've won 12 out of 14, nobody's mentioning that Porzingis hasn't been playing. Now, Porzingis is coming back for the finals. Listen, Doncic and Kyrie may be good enough to keep them in the series and make it fairly interesting. But to me, if Porzingis is right, Boston's an overwhelming favorite, and Boston's got all its guys signed, and they've got Tatum eligible, Derek White eligible for an extension, and their 5 best guys are signed through 2026.
Exactly. And that means
that's the, I'm just talking 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. That's 5 years where the Celtics have a chance, I think more of a chance than the Nuggets do, to win multiple championships, get to the finals maybe several times during that stretch, keeping this team together and having low-cost guys like Pritchard and Hauser coming off the bench.
And they have more salary cap remaining going into next season, at least with all those guys signed. They are 12th most on the cap. The Nuggets, by the way, 10th most on the cap. Of course, all their guys are signed as well. So that's a
true.
Big part of it. The idea of how much is
and the Nuggets could keep their team together if they wish.
We'll find out what happens over the course of the year there. But I guess I do look at this situation. I think Parity has. I think as long as the CBA is in effect, Parity more or less has reached it now, because Boston has really done the best over the last few years. There's no argument. Yeah, even if they lose this, it's hard to say that over that span that anyone's been better.
Right.
But eventually, especially when the bar is set as high as it is in Boston.
But you could make an argument if they lose in the finals that somebody's been Denver
it's
as
not
good.
Enough. Right. You could, because you could argue Denver with wins just, right up there, and a 3-time MVP, a title that the Celtics don't yet have.
But here's what it does, though, the whole CBA thing. OKC, San Antonio, they've got lots of room.
Well, and the NFL,
they're on the way.
Right.
They're coming
and it's
on.
no longer a long wait. It can be quick. That's the thing. It can be fast. And for a long time, it was not fast. These things took a long time to build yourself up. Now it gives you an opportunity, much like the NFL. If you draft well, develop well, and make smart signings, you can go from bad to pretty good pretty quick. Go look at Houston, for example. Houston
absolutely
went from being a total afterthought last year to being a threat to make the playoffs all year long, and they did the number to the Denver Nuggets. And they'll be in the mix too. San Antonio in the mix. These teams are coming.
And remember, in the Stern years, you'd find a handful of championship contenders going into a season, realistically, right? 4, 5, 4, maybe 6.
Max. Everybody else was the Washington Generals.
Now,
everybody.
I think that number has doubled, if not tripled, that teams are going for it. I think I'd say more than half, maybe as many as 18, 19 teams are quote unquote going for it. Going into a season, at least you can get to the second round. And people always go in, get out the second round. Get the second round, you're one of the top 8 teams in a 30-team sport.
And you take your chances. Injuries somewhere
absolutely.
here and there.
Then injuries become a factor, luck, and so on. And if things break right, you win and advance. And if things don't break right, you're out in the second round. But losing in the second round, I don't know when that became kind of a black mark against a team's legacy. They can't get back to second round.
It's now the standard for a champion.
I mean,
5 straight years.
If you go out in the first round,
in the second round,
that's 16 out of 30. I get it. But if you're bouncing the second round, you're one of the top 8 teams in the league. Maybe you're not a top 5 team, but you're a top 10 team. What's wrong with that?
It'll be a fascinating
year after year
off season for the Denver Nuggets. Obviously, they have a lot of work to do. We'll follow it as we go along as well. Want to thank Dan Mohrmann of Colorado Preps, the editor-in-chief, for joining us. ColoradoPreps.com. Go check out his story on Marc Johnson and Cherry Creek baseball after their stunning storybook ending. Remarkable stuff. Thank you for tuning in, watching us. We really appreciate it. You can always go to the YouTube channel at Mile High Sports, and you can follow us directly. We appreciate it. We appreciate all the people interacting on the comments as well, taking a peek at that as the show goes along. We appreciate it too. We'll be back tomorrow. Danny Bailey is the man that makes all of this work. Thanks so much for Danny. We can't do it without him. We'll be back. We have to step aside for now. For Santa Clough, I'm Shawn Drotar. This is Mile High Sports.